Well, the silicone, my feet don't reach the ground, so I'm constantly like trying to scooch myself away.
Yeah, you gotta have a license to drive.
I know. Which is still on these.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, calling the meeting to order, pledge allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which we stand, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. So somehow the agenda, I don't think we need to do introductions, I think everybody knows everybody. I don't know the dog's name, no, Robert? Dog's name? Your dog's name? Which? I'm sorry. Which? Good, and what's your name?
Pam,
Dan?
yep, Pam Dunning.
So Pam is the select board liaison to your committee. Pam.
So maybe we do have to do, introductions.
Yeah, maybe you do.
So my name's Tom Joyce.
Right, Adams?
Bob Nesbitt. Pam Dunning.
Robert Jones.
Heather Jones, this is the Jones table over here.
There you go.
No relation that we know of.
The Free State of Jones. I think there's a movie about that. Okay, so the agenda is we're going to elect the committee chair and clerk. That was the previous chair, so I will hand over to whomever is elected in just a moment. Get a status update from Dennis, just on where we stand on any current status, the town's budget situation relative to what we left it off in the beginning of June. We might talk briefly about any special projects. Last year, I think we were pretty effective in the fall and through the winter, especially on the LED project, which now we have LED lights all over the town,
Which is now completed, by the way.
so, if there are things that, Dennis would like us to help with, not things that we would necessarily dive in independently, but things you'd like us to help with, I think, I've done that the last 2 years and more than happy to jump in and help where we can. And that's pretty much it, unless there's any other business or comments or ideas that people have about what we want to do this year. So the first order of business is to elect the committee chair and clerk. The chair is going to schedule the meetings, manage the
I
meetings.
make a motion to keep Tom as chair.
Second. Do you have any other nominations? Okay, all in favor? Motion passes unanimously. And the clerk, the responsibilities of the clerk are to take the notes and distribute them to the members of the committee and to the town, who will post them immediately upon receipt to the town website or as occasion presents itself. Do we have any nominations for clerk? Or any volunteers?
You can nominate yourself.
Dusty's such a good writer.
Okay, I nominate Heather Jones. Do we have a second?
A second.
All in favor? Motion passes unanimously. So thank you for volunteering. All right, Dennis, status update on where we stand.
So a couple of things. I think we need to look at, since Pam and I talked about this, I think we need to look at the budget committee and maybe realize that this ordinance was passed mostly back in 1977, when the town had 3 selectmen and no town manager. And so they played, I think, a different role back then than what they play now. And I think we really just need to look at it. And as Pam said, I don't know about a job description, but better define what it is that you should be doing here. Because back then they were more involved in the development of the budget, but now that's my job. So I think, any ideas that you guys have from having sat on this committee, gather them up and get them to me and say, how can we make this more efficient? One of the biggest problems that we've had is this is an elected board. You're supposed to take out papers and run, not be appointed. And that's why we get into some of these situations each year with appointments, because these appointments expire at every town meeting. If they're appointed, they're only good until June. The following year, we have to go through this all over again. And we already talked about the write-in thing last year, which turned into a major fiasco for us. So we need to look at either removing that stipulation and saying, okay, like other committees, you're appointed for a 3-year term, or however it goes, but, I mean, I'm looking for ideas as to how we can make this function better than it has the last couple of years. Because I know it's been frustrating for you, it's frustrating for me, and I have to deal with the town clerk, it's frustrating, she's got enough on her plate right now, without dealing with all this community stuff, so if you guys have, some, you can gather them and get them to me as to how we can do this better. In terms of updates, last year's budget, we had one budget that we were over budget on by $28 or $26, and that was the animal control budget. Managed to fix that. So everybody came in on the budget. I haven't looked at it recently this week, but it looked like we had somewhere around a $500,000 underspent in our budget and underestimated revenue by about 700,000. So I said we've got somewhere in the area of $1 million to place in the fund balance this year. 5 years ago, the town's fund balance was like $30,000. And now it's back up to a little bit over where it should be. We should be hovering just over $2 million. We haven't got the audit yet, but based on my estimates, I think we're somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 million, plus whatever we put into it this year. So the town is really heading back on a good path financially, getting back to where we should be as far as our fund balance goes. That extra money can be used for, people go back in the payson account, use for capital stuff, leave the payson account alone, whatever the select board decides that they're going to do that. So maybe use some of it to offset tax increase this year, which is going to happen. There's no way to go 3 years in a row without something, because the school budget was up $500 million, just so much. So, but that's where we're at budget-wise for this year. I'm pleased with all of the added expenses that we had coming at us last year. We were able to execute that. So I do have a project that I'm probably going to ask you to work on, and maybe even ask you to work on it jointly with the climate team, and that is yes, the Johnson Controls. They have sent me the proposal. I'm not particularly happy with the price. Just don't have any money budgeted for it anyways. But I'm gonna ask you guys to look into this and see what some alternatives might be for what we can do.
And just to clarify, for anybody that hasn't been paying close attention to this, this is in the context of we're spending too much money on fuel and energy in general, or Johnson Controls had presented at least the idea of doing a consulting project with some guarantees in it to bring that those costs down, but there's an upfront fee component to it.
So what actually got this, so what actually got this started was this particular building here. Because our boilers in this building are 30 years old. We know they're inefficient. We know they're sucking up more oil than they need to. The whole system is on the fritz because every single office in this building is a zone. And every single zone valve in this building is gone. So that means the heat's either running nonstop or we don't have it. So we have to do something with this building. And we had a hard time finding somebody, an HVAC engineer that would come in and say, this is what we think you should do here. So Joe Foster, whose father lives in town, or maybe he lives in the rest of it. Anyway, they're from Wiscasset. He was an HVAC engineer for DuPont, and he moved up here from Connecticut, and he saw that we were looking for this, and he reached out to me. He said, I can do this. It's great. And he started doing it, and he was like really into it. What he didn't tell us was the reason he moved up here from Connecticut was because he had cancer in his stomach. And he passed away before he even got close to having it finished. So we ended up way back to square one. And then along came Johnson Controls, but they wanted to expand it beyond here to all the town buildings. But we know we're spending a lot of money to heat the pool up at the community center, a lot of money at the community center. So we got thinking there must be a way that we can do this better and more efficiently than what we're doing. Whether it's solar or geothermal or biomass, whatever it is, I don't know. We just don't have anybody on staff here that's capable of doing anyways near that. So they offered to do a free preliminary study, and it was really preliminary. I can tell you, it was pretty short on specifics, and because they want you to sign on to pay them to get the specifics, but what they sent me was $75,000 to evaluate and redesign the HVAC in all these buildings, which may or may not be a good number. I have no idea. But so I may ask you guys to be digging into that, like you did the LED lights, which was a huge help. Just one less thing that I need to work on, and then work with the climate team as to whether or not, we could do solar, put solar on this roof, power this building. Should we just get a big solar farm to do the whole thing? Should we build a small nuclear plant to do it? Because you already know where I stand on that. I'm all for it. So, that may be one of the more immediate projects that I asked you guys to work on. Besides regular budget stuff that I've already got started on for next year.
I can't believe that. The least expensive thing I would see, and I'm not an engineer, is replace the boilers with gas boilers. And then replace those mixing valves, and you're done.
Well, so it also turns out that probably in the 30 years that boiler's been there, the system has never been serviced. It's never been drained, it's never been cleaned out. The pipes are, I don't know what kind of shape they're actually in. Johnson Controls actually did agree to come and do a more in-depth look at this. And they didn't recommend replacing the boilers with gas, but they did recommend replacing the oil boilers with more efficient ones. We could still use most of the system that's here, but they have more efficient oil. And I agree with that.
I held an oil burner on our house. And gas, quarter side of the other one, and so much more efficient.
The other issue that we have with this is just it's air conditioning. Because this half of the building doesn't have it. That's why we have these flipping things that just run nonstop, which are also just sucking up power all the way to time. And so I think what Joel was kind of heading for was they are making now industrial heat pump. Was headed towards maybe a bigger heat pump. I think he said he could do it with 2 heat pumps on the side and on that side. And then keep the, do the work on the boilers here and keep them as a backup for bitter cold days. He can't do. Anyways, I mean, I think that's some of the stuff that I would ask you guys to look into, because it's gonna take some time.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, I just don't have to put into it.
Okay, how would you like us to engage in that, or
Well,
how would you like us to engage in that?
Right now, what I need to do is I need to go through the development agreement that he sent me last week. Because I only looked at was the price, and I'm like, well, I don't think I'm gonna do that. And figure out where to go from there, and then I will send that to you and say, here's what's been presented. This is what I think. I don't think the select board's gonna be happy with this. I don't think we can get the town to go along. I mean, their proposal is to borrow a little over $2 million to do all this work. I don't know if we can get the town to actually go along.
Yeah, big number.
Well, because I think they had trouble getting the town to go along when the school did it several years ago.
Yeah.
So I just don't foresee that happening. So I think we need to scale it down. I know Marty emailed us and said, we'll take the school out of it. Well, we can take the school out of it, but I'm not sure at what point they're gonna say, okay, well, this isn't a big enough project. We don't want to move forward with this. It's all or nothing. I haven't had that discussion right now, so.
Well, I guess a couple of things I would say, and then maybe other people have some feedback on your first point of, what should the budget committee be? I will get feedback from everybody on their thoughts, and some people spend a little time on it, some people spend a lot of time on budget committee. My sense of it personally is that, and I shared some of this with you at the beginning of the year last year, is that if you just look at the ordinance, the scope and responsibilities of the budget committee are extremely limited. And we go through and we look at the budgets collectively with you and then with the select board, and we make a recommendation. The vast majority of those budgets, there aren't a lot of degrees of freedom there. there are a couple, especially in capital, where there are actually things where we can, we can debate and talk about, but there aren't a lot of degrees of freedom. And the sense that I have from talking to people who are on the budget committee in the past, last year and the year before, and aren't here anymore, a lot of the frustration is people want to add value, people want to do work, people want to spend the time. But if you just do what's in that ordinance, it doesn't, it feels like you're banging your head against the wall.
It's pretty useless, as it is right now, in my opinion, it's useless.
And the other part of that is that there are some folks, and I don't think they're the majority, but I've run into a few who have been involved with the town government who want it that way, who actually don't want the budget committee to do very much. And that has become an obstacle for a few people as well. Now, what I would say is the more gratifying parts of doing this last year and the year before were doing things that weren't written down in the ordinance. Helping out with the LED project, going out and meeting with a couple of departments and figuring out, hey, inventing some of the things that were on the capital plan, so that when the capital plan comes forward and they say we need a fire truck, we are actually aware of the needs around the fire truck. So that stuff through the course of the winter, that work was actually, you felt like you were adding some value. So I think to the extent that, at least for me personally, we can identify one or two of those things, and we can maybe get with some of these departments through the winter, so that when we show up in the spring, we actually know what we're looking at. That's time well spent. Just doing what's in the ordinance is like you said, a waste of time.
Yeah, if I may, when this ordinance was put into place, as Dennis said, there was a three-man board of selectmen, and there was a person selectman who was essentially the town manager. And the budget committee's job was to once the select board built their budget, the budget committee's job was to then, go over the budget, make sure it was reasonable and all those things. What's happened now is we have a town manager who builds the budget,
Yeah, it's done.
and the selectmen are essentially his budget committee for that piece of the work.
Exactly.
So, and I think the budget committee could be a very valuable asset here if they were doing more of the work that you just talked about.
Right, and that's what we wanted to do the last couple of years. I
Yeah.
think we made some incremental progress, but not in enough areas where it's really worth the effort.
So maybe if you poll your members and see where their interests lie, maybe also reach out to a couple of other towns who might still have a budget committee and they have a town manager form of government, see what their budget committees are doing.
Yeah.
It might give you some insight into opportunities here.
Now, the only other
This is
thing
in flux, so it's.
I would say, just kind of for the record, and I think you would agree with me, is that all works as long as we're on the same page in terms of where we're gonna go digging in. I think when people kind of go off sort of road and start helping in areas where, we don't have agreement, we're gonna help, it sort of gets unwieldy. It was kind of unwieldy for me as a chairman to know what the hell is going on. What the heck is going on? So I think, if we can come up with what people think is worth time to do, put that plan together and discuss it with you before we go off and start doing things, that would be kind of the way I would think about proceeding. Does that make sense?
But I would point out that the ordinance says that you make a recommendation. It doesn't specify what that recommendation is.
Yeah.
It doesn't say it's yes or no, it has been. But I know in Elliott, when I was living down there, their budget committee, now they operate under a charter, so it's a little bit different. But it makes it more, and I'm not advocating to do this because it makes it more complicated, but there's two figures on each one of their warrants. Selectman figure, budget committee's figure, and they're not always the same. They're not miles apart. Most of the time, they're like open town meeting, you spend 2 hours diggering over $50 and spend 2 minutes spending 500,000. But so there are variations of how it's works. That would make the ballot more confusing.
Make it harder for the voters.
I think it would. And the other thing that I always complain about, this isn't really a budget committee thing so much as it's a select thing, is these warrants are too long. there's too many things for people to vote on. And if you looked at last year's, as you got down the pages for the number of things on there, the more blank ballots you started to see, more and more, because people just stopped. They just got tired of marking things, they just stopped voting on stuff, and the ballots went in blank. And that skews your results, you know, on things, especially anything that's gonna be reasonably close. If you had 50 people that just didn't vote, you know, that was a lot. So I really think there's some places that we could combine some of these budgets together and bring this down a little bit. That's all.
Any other questions, comments, feedback?
To your point you just made, some of that stuff that's in every warrant, can that be standardized and made into ordinances rather than something that we vote on?
Some of them probably could be, some of the housekeeping stuff that they vote on every year. I have to check with MMA on that. If it can be codified instead of put on the warrant every year, it's a possibility. I think most towns do it the way we do, so I suspect that's a reason that has been practical.
I think we looked into it once, especially for that 3/12 of the budget. And I think we looked into it once at that point. I mean, I'm talking 8 or 10 years ago when I was on the board of selectmen, but I think at that point that had to be voted every year. You know, and the same as voting your interest rate.
Right, because the state
Yeah,
sets the interest rate each year, so that would have to be different.
Right.
But some of what I think he's referring to is the acceptance of grants and outside funds that are on there,
Oh, yeah.
accept their donations, because all of that stuff is on the warrant every year. And that might be able to be codified in here.
We can also just take all those and put those opinions that are warrant. So when people stop filling it out, those are the things that are out there. I'm thinking of the stuff that says we continue for 3.5 months with the budget from last year. If this one doesn't pass, kind of stuff.
That's what she just referred
Yeah,
to.
that, I think you have to vote that every year. It says like 10 or 12 years ago, when I was on early days on the budget. That was the case.
I know there are some things that are set by statute that have to be done every year. Just like the check, it's on your agenda tomorrow, the check policy, that's supposed to be renewed by the selectmen every single year.
Why?
Because that's what the statute actually says,
Right.
which is kind of ridiculous. So we didn't renew it last year because we just didn't do that.
Just if I could, I think the other thing we should be looking at too, is something else you had already said, well, Dennis said that, instead of being elected positions, making them appointed positions, changing the ordinance so that these are appointed positions, so that, which is essentially what it's become. And having that, I mean, you might have more people with an interest if they didn't have to work so hard to get one to the committee and then find themselves spinning their wheels wondering.
Yeah, I think, unless I misunderstand, that would be an issue for the select board to take up.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think you get any objection from
Well, no,
somebody here.
yeah, no, I just, no, but I would wanna make sure it was put out there to everybody so that it wasn't, oh, the selectmen are changing how we do things. You don't ever want anything to look like it was a backward deal, it's supposed to, But I think it would be easier for people to get on.
Yeah.
And I think if there were guidelines and in place that tells you what the responsibilities are, what the roles are, because it's changed so much in the last, even the last 20 years, but in the last 50 years since that ordinance was written.
I understand.
It's a
So
completely
if you talk to people as you do, there are a lot of people that don't want to be involved in it for
Yeah.
the reasons we just discussed. So,
Yeah.
Robert.
Wouldn't MMA have a template or boilerplate for setting up a budget committee,
No, because they're not required by state statute.
the budget committee?
The budget committee is not required by state statute. If you do have a budget committee, there are certain things that you are required to do, but I've looked to see if there was a template for the budget committee, and I can't find one. And they generally kind of stay away from things that, if it's not state required, they kind of stay out of it a little bit. But I mean, we certainly can look at other towns that have, you know, budget committees and see what they're doing and see if they have something that's a little more recent than what's in the past. Well, we certainly want to participate, you know, encourage more participation in local government and not less. And this just seems really unreal.
Well, I mean, and there really isn't another, other than the select board itself, another entity that's your work together. There's nobody else in the town that goes out and vets these things from a voter standpoint, says, does this make sense? Yes, it does make sense. That's helpful. Or maybe you ought to consider these other alternatives, right? So I think it can be valuable as long as it's, you know, as long as it's accepted, frankly, by the select board as this is work we want you to do, rather than this is work that, frankly, we don't need that kind of input, you know? So I think if the select board is, we can pull together our point of view, right? If the select board is supportive of that, we should be more helpful. I think that's quite simple.
I think that's where I'd like to see that go. So that would be my suggestion.
I had one other question, kind of sort of related to this, and that is, there's a can of worms that I'm not saying I think we should do, but I've been interested in is the school budget. The budget committee doesn't look at the school budget. And if you read the ordinance as it's written, it would seem to indicate that, you know, that's something that falls under the purview of the budget committee.
I agree.
And one of the select board members, Bill Maloney, has said to me a couple of times, you guys ought to be digging into this. But there isn't a natural entry point, you know, they've kind of got their own structure going, and it's a big, complicated budget, right? So I'm not necessarily sure it makes sense or doesn't make sense, but if you look at where the town spends its budget money, you know, we're not looking at a very large chunk of it when we're not looking at the school. So I don't know if you have-
The school budget is over $10 million this year. That's a lot of money.
So we're looking at dog catcher. We're not looking at the biggest thing out there.
And the reason you're not is because when school consolidation happened here, thank you, Mr. McCartney, for messing that up for us. When school consolidation happened here, they put a law into effect that the only thing that the townspeople are allowed to say is yes or no on the number voted at the last school budget meeting. So that's all we're allowed to vote on. So I don't think that has, I think that's gotten been a little pushed aside. I'm not sure that we have to stand by that.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just asking the question. It seemed to me that even if there's a structure, even if that was exactly the box that we had to live within,
The way that question is.
there may still be an opportunity to go in there and scrutinize it.
Yes, yeah, because the way that question is written on the ballot is what the law actually word for word says, this goes on your ballot.
I guess my point, Pam, is it doesn't necessarily mean
Right.
that you couldn't have a set of meetings where you said, does this make sense?
Right.
Explain to me why.
Right.
Right, and I know the select board does that. I'm not sure how deep that goes, and how much, how much time gets spent on it. I'm just asking the question, because,
I don't
I
think
remember sitting here in May looking at these budgets, thinking, we're not looking at like 10 million of it. And that's kind of completely out of control, like for people in the town.
I've never been at a select board meeting where the school brought their budget to the select board,
That is my understanding.
ever.
Yeah, I don't know. that
Open
it's
town
ever-
meeting either. They used to bring it to the open town meeting, but they never brought it to the board.
But the school is technically a department of the town. That's what it is. It's a municipal school. It's not a regional school, it's a department of the town.
So I just put that, on the middle of the table. I don't have a set of answers, but it, maybe worth thinking about, given that we're right at the beginning, whether there's an opportunity to at least have a conversation about how that gets looked at. Again, I don't know how much resistance there would be, or whether we open doors, but it's worth having. Do you agree?
Definitely. That's one thing I kind of argued many times on the select board is that any group of people in town has the right to meet together and formulate an opinion about how the town spends money and then distribute that opinion. If we don't have the ordinance telling us to do that, we could make that decision to do it on our own. So I don't see where it's denied to us by any means. It would be very valuable. The last couple of those votes that I attended, there were like 20 people who voted, and there was zero discussion, and then the vote was not unanimous. So people had feelings about it, but they didn't discuss it. So, yeah, it would be great, I think, to get all this on the table and disseminate the information.
The last school budget I went to, that passed the budget in May, there was 17 voted on a $10 million budget. 16 people voted on a $10 million budget, because I was there, I didn't know. And the same two people brought up every single question. And I don't think anybody voted against anything. And the only time that I recall any question being asked was when I asked them what was in their fund balance up there. And it took them 10 minutes to find out. So I think it's gonna be a rabbit hole, but I think it's one that needs to be done.
I think so too. Okay, good. Are there any other questions, comments, feedback, ideas at this stage? Okay, so I think we're required to have a meeting with the select board jointly around the December timeframe.
Yep.
Okay, and so we don't need to have a meeting before that, but what I will do is I will do what we just discussed and see if we can get some feedback on what people think we ought to do within the scope of the ordinance and also outside the scope of the ordinance. I'll consolidate that and I will get that to all of us. And we can discuss that in advance of December. And then you can let us know when you want us to look at the Johnson Controls thing and how you want us to look at it. We'll proceed that way, kind of go off on our own.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
All right, any other old business, new business comments?
Yeah, Dennis, you mentioned something about 75,000 on Johnson Control. Was that for the preliminary study of what?
This is for the development agreement. So the preliminary study itself didn't cost us anything.
Okay,
This is part of the development agreement now, where we start now getting it in the nuts and bolts of, here's what I think we should do. I mean, preliminarily, we know they probably want to look at putting biomass boilers in here as opposed to gas. They want to put a solar farm up at the community center and just use that to power the community center, and help along those lines up there. Solar on the roof of the high school, which would power all of the high school. So there's they give me some little snippets of what it is they want to do, but we don't great details.
so it's
And then
greater than
develop-
just this building.
Oh, yeah, no, this is every building that we own.
Okay.
Yeah. And we might be able to still pare it down, take the school out of it, and tear it down and do something, I don't know. I don't just know where to go with it, that's why I'm looking for.
Part of that piece that concerned me is very quietly in the middle of a discussion, one of them said, well, this would be phase one.
I heard that.
Yeah. And do every building in town, this is phase one, and then, okay, what are you looking at for phase two, and then is that gonna,
Long-term commitment.
yes.
You know, where.
Yes,
where's
and
the-
you're locked in for.
Yeah, where's the rubber meet around here?
They're a great company, but they're one of the most valuable public company stocks for a reason.
Yeah.
Just have to play your cards.
Have any other engineering firms been approached?
Yeah, we've tried, I don't know, Ted has tried so many firms, just because we needed this building done.
Yeah.
And then right now, nobody's taken on anything extra because they can't keep up with the work that they have. And a lot of them can't get enough employees to do what they need to do. I mean, you would think by now that some of that would be starting to level out a little bit, but it's in some areas, it's actually getting worse. It's pretty frustrating. We only got one paving bid this year. And part of that was the weather, because, it was such a wet June. Now this paving company is just far behind. They won't take on any extra work. Even though we pretty much knew what the bid prices were going to be anyway as well.
Is there a town engineer?
I mean,
All right, any other questions or comments or feedback before we request a motion to adjourn? We we have a motion to adjourn? All in favor? Thank you. Folks. So,